Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free, which means you have to really think about your proximity to power when we're talking about politics and definitely for cutting through this propaganda. There is this left right divide in our political scene, which it makes it difficult to kind of tell where you are because it flips back and forth and swings from side to side, right? Sometimes the
Hmm.
Republicans are the good guys, sometimes the Democrats are the good guy, and it's hard to keep track of where you are. So I have with me Thaddeus Russell, a libertarian, and oh,
No,
not a libertarian.
no, no. We
I'm
need to start
sorry.
right. We need to start right there.
I'm sorry, not a libertarian. I mean, I would call myself like kind of libertarian-ish if I had to pick a label, though I am a
Um,
registered Democrat. But yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
whoa,
I'm sorry
that
about that.
registered Democrat. Wow.
No, I know.
That's hard to hear. I used to be one in 1984. I voted for Walter Mondale. That's the last time I voted. That's the last time I've been a member of a party. Anyway, no, I have many, many times said publicly that I'm not a libertarian. I don't identify as one. Never have, never will.
I'm sorry
Uh,
about that. I didn't mean to. We were just talking about
but wait,
libertarian.
but
Are
hang
you
on.
a podcast
But there's
host?
but hang
Right?
on. There's way more to be said about that. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
but it is also totally true that, listen to this, were I to be a congressperson, which I never would, but like if you just somehow like teleported me into a seat in Congress, my voting record would be identical to Ron Paul's.
Okay.
Like identical. Now, so you could say
I mean,
within
that's if I was to choose, my ideal or, close to perfect politician, definitely Ron Paul, a Thomas Massey. Rand isn't bad, he does pretty good.
he's no. Massey is probably the best remaining, but the no, but see the thing is, okay, so does that mean so that means within the context of American electoral politics, government, yeah, I'm a libertarian, sure. But there's so much more in the world than that, right? That matters, that's even political. Even libertarians would acknowledge that there's things that aren't about law or the state necessarily that are highly political and that place individual liberties at stake,
Right.
right? Like, for instance, racism. Like, and I don't mean like college students saying, oh, that someone said a mean word, the Ku Klux Klan's trying to kill me. I mean like legit old school, round them up, put them in camps or put them in ghettos and keep them there, and that kind of stuff. And like
Right.
these people over here are biologically inferior to us. That kind of racism. It was never necessarily attached to the state or law. Sometimes it was. Sometimes, mostly, it's just sort of, what is that? Culture, free floating stuff, talk, ideas, thoughts, Sometimes violence, sometimes physical actions by private citizens, individual private citizens, or acting in groups as private citizens doing racist stuff, squashing, obviously, the individual liberties of lots and lots of people. Slaves are just one example.
Right.
So this goes back to a Jeffrey Tucker essay, which I didn't like the essay, but it was a good question he raised about the differences between what he called thick and thin libertarianism. This is like maybe
Okay.
15 years ago. And I was like, the essay itself didn't make any sense, but the question he raised did to me. And I clearly is what he would call a thick libertarian, not meaning dumb, but meaning that we see important politics in which individual liberty is at stake, not just in government and law, even though those things, and economics, even though those things are tremendously important, right? We see our liberties at stake, our individual liberties at stake in things like cultures. There are cultures that are hostile to individual liberty, like a culture of racism.
Yeah.
Like a culture of communism. Communism is an economic system, a political system, an ideology. It's also a culture. It became a culture, right? There's a cult. I know because I grew up in it. There's a culture of there's ways of behavior and attitudes and right thinking about all sorts of questions, right? And that culture is throughout, and I know it again because I lived through it. Is throughout it hostile, as you know, to individual liberty. Like it's proudly so. When the communists that I was dealing with were so far away from government power, it was ridiculous, right? They had no power whatsoever over anybody. They were never going to pass a law. But within the milieu, and I was in it, I felt like this. I felt like the gulag of the mind, but it was social. There were social consequences, ostracism. Maybe you can't get a job. Maybe your uncle won't help you out later in life when he needs, what, because he's a communist and you're not. And what? These are hypotheticals. It didn't happen to me. I mean, I actually have had falling outs, though, massive falling outs within my family, stupidly over politics. But but the point is here that cultural politics affect you at a level that distant wars like Gaza don't. If you live here, it's your soul, your person, daily. You feel it. People are punishing you.
Very strong.
Yes, there's all sorts of punishments that are meted out on a daily basis, right? Whereas they could bomb 10,000 more children in Gaza, and I could live my life as most Americans are, as if it's not even happening.
Right. Which I think makes that issue all that more complex, right? Because you have that social layer at work, then you have the actual political layer at work, but then you have the political issue so far removed from everything.
So what I've been trying to do since I discovered libertarians, which was about 15 years ago, because they discovered me, because I wrote my book, A Renegade History of the United States. And the only people who paid attention to it were libertarians. I was like, who are you weirdos? And why do you care about this book? Because you're right. I thought they were right wing, whatever. I didn't know anything. So once I started finding out who they were, I was like, oh, I see. Okay. You guys need to understand that you've only gone halfway with your project of libertarianism. Like I could become a libertarian. I could call myself that if they become as a mass thick libertarians and take seriously culture. Take seriously the workings of power within culture and its effects against or on individual freedom. The stuff you guys tell me all the time you care so much about, but have very little to say about like an authoritarian culture. Which could be just like a football team, like the head coach football team.
I think that's why I was drawn to being a teacher, to being a history teacher, because politics and activism, it's become more important to me as I've gotten older and been able to understand it. But just my I guess my own personal way of understanding the world, I was like, well, if we want to create change, we need to educate people on these fundamental values and principles, and then the historical context, so you can make sense of that world and then go out there. And if you choose, get involved in politics. But we definitely need to change the culture first, and then politics will follow.
And let me say this again. So this is right, I think should be a bullseye in the heart of libertarians to win them over to where I'm trying to get them to. I think the most pervasive and powerful and politically and historically consequential culture has been and continues to be the culture of the state. The culture of the state. Now, what is the culture of the state? This is my definition. Okay, this is not like, and from a textbook, this is what I'm saying it is. The culture, and this leads right into where we're going with our discussion about Palestine.
Yeah.
Right. Has to do with one's cultural or psychological proximity to the state. Now, the state is the hard apparatus, right? The buildings, the employees, the guns, the tanks, the prisons, the cops, the squad cars. Okay. But but it also is, and libertarians know this very, very well, it is a constant psychological operation as well, isn't it? The state, there's no matter what the issue is, and no matter what the government is, by the way, no matter what kind of state it is, whether it's communist or it's Galt's Gulch or whatever the fuck, like it doesn't matter. There will be psychological operations to maintain the operation of the state. And
Right.
I think libertarians should like vibe with that, right? That shouldn't be hard. So
Yeah,
now
I
where
think you can even like bring it down, right? Like if you have a business, you want to create a culture and you want to make sure that your employees are in that culture and you're doing updates and you're, retraining them as necessary and things like that. So it's done naturally in all sorts of arenas.
So if your state wants to it fosters an economy, an economic system that is neither straight up communist nor straight up free market, but some kind of managed liberal middle corporatist joint. Well, what are you going to teach in the schools? Which this is where and this is where libertarians should really be excited now, right? What's the major disseminating hub for the culture of the state? Obviously it's the public schools, where they have our children locked up all day against our will.
Yeah.
Teaching them whatever they want. But is it whatever they want? No, it's whatever the state needs them to be taught, of course. So, and then those kids walk outside. Now, is it only therefore burn down the public schools? Sure, start there. But that's just the start, right? Because the kids, then the stuff is internalized in their minds, which is now a culture. Then they walk out of the school, free private citizens, individual liberty, but they have the culture in their head. So they talk about the need for the United States to be an empire.
Yeah, maybe not in those exact words, but they go out with that idea. I mean, I think
they'll say,
yeah, go ahead.
But they'll say, sorry. They'll say, for instance, did you hear that Iran attacked American ships in the Red Sea? We have to go to war with Iran. How dare they?
That's the exact example I was going to use. I was like, right now, that is captured in this idea of there's a war on the West, right? We have these foreign Eastern terrorists. What are some other words that they use to describe them? Savages, right? That are attacking our higher moral values. Yeah. And I hesitated when I called this, how to know if you're on the right side of history, because I generally do not like that term. I don't like proclaiming that I'm on the right side of history, or I have enough moral clarity to know what is right and wrong. I think that
it's a totalitarian sentiment. I've always hated that.
Right.
It comes right out of the 60s left. You're on the wrong side of history. Oh, it's completely totalitarian.
Yeah. So, for better or worse, I did title this video that. I think it kind of does capture an idea that at least we're trying to dig into and provide some more nuance to. But also, I do think you can sort of tell, not to proclaim that I'm like the totalitarian, if you're on the right or the wrong side of the issue based on your proximity to power. Right. Yeah. And so both literally in how close you are to the system itself, but even if you're not, in Washington, D.C. or in the head of some organization, are you articulating and expressing the position of the establishment, or are you criticizing and or offering an alternative view to the establishment? And typically, if you are on the side of the established powers, the government, you should probably question the side of history you're on. And again, not to say that you shouldn't question your position if you don't happen to be on the government side, but generally speaking, you're going to be arguing, I would say, from a more principled point of view. not always, right? There's people like, I happen to be on the same side of the woke left for the Palestine
Mhm.
issue.
Mhm.
And I don't think that they arrive to their conclusion for the same reason I do. But they do, I think, arrive at the proper conclusion. And it happens to be the one that is anti establishment, despite previously, with their Black Lives Matter and their gender positions, being
Mhm.
on the same side as power. So that's, it gets a little confusing. But I do think that if you hold the government and or the established powers as the center and keep track of yourself, regardless if you end up on the left or the right, in context of that, you can know, for better or worse, which side of history you're on.
Boom. Yes, I think as a political prescription, that's what I would say precisely. So, for instance, if you find yourself tweeting out something, some factoid about the Gaza war, for instance, whatever, the IDF has killed 14,000 Hamas fighters. Period. Okay. Just all I ask is just check the source, and in that case, you find out that the one and only source is the IDF, which is a government.
Right.
Hello. The worst part of a state, guys, is the IDF, and they are producing basically most of the information that the pro-Israel side is relying upon. They're producing facts. Now, you could say that these facts are correct. I will cut off my genitalia if they have killed 14,000 Hamas fighters. I like I will convert to Orthodox Judaism. I'm a quarter Jewish. I do qualify for citizenship in Israel. I will take Aliyah. I will fight in the IDF. How about that? If you guys have actually killed 14,000 Hamas fighters, I'll be your slave forever, as the settlers like to say to the Palestinians. You're going to be our slaves. So back this proximity to power thing. It's about one's acculturation. It's about the culture that you grew up in or that you acquired. Many people can assimilate into it, like immigrants, right? They come from another country, they come here, they're all of a sudden like super patriotic Uncle Sams and believe everything the State Department says. Lots and lots of immigrants have done exactly that. They've literally become cops to prove that they're good Americans, right? So, but check the culture that's inside of you, which is the preset for all your assumptions. We all have to operate with assumptions, right? Presumptions. Sure, just to move around, but check them. And if, as you were saying, when you do, and you find that your presumptions look a lot like the State Department's presumptions or the Department of Interior's presumptions, and here's what I want another point, then you might want to think again if you think you're an anti-statist or libertarian or interested in individual liberty in any way, shape, or form, any kind of anarchist. The other thing I wanted to say is that it's not just public schools producing ideologies. In fact, that's far less powerful, I think, for the state than what the New York Times does and what CNN does and what MSNBC does and what Fox does. And, they're private actors, corporations. They don't get funding from the federal government or any government, really. But is there a more powerful disseminator of the culture of the state than those networks, than those media outlets? No. I mean, everyone sees that. And it's about their presumptions that they bring to the broadcasts, to their news writing, to the way they analyze the news. They presume that the United States might make mistakes, but good-hearted. Our basic thrust as a country, our basic essence as a country is good and noble and virtuous and just. We fucked up many times. We say that, sure. But basically, we are the good guys.
Yeah.
And everyone else is the bad guys or our friends as subordinates. That is the way Americans are taught to think about the world. You start there, right? And basically, the rest of the world has to prove that they're good enough to be our friends, so we don't kill them. But we assume that, well, and especially with certain parts of the world, it's so baked in at this point after decades and decades of this acculturation. Well, Muslim, whoop, ding. I mean, even good liberals who march in BLM marches get like, when they hear like Arab Muslim and they hear like the name of a Middle Eastern country, they're like, what do they think? They don't think of a guy in a suit and a tie. Yeah, they think of a guy with a Kalashnikov.
And it's
here,
interesting.
yeah.
I was going to say, and it seems like that's why domestically, I generally think that people can do pretty good on domestic issues. I guess not everybody, right? There's always going to be a split. But I would say, like, the anti-woke crowd, the most recent sort of culmination of this, the anti-woke crowd is really good on domestic issues. And I think that's because there is no outside bad guy boogeyman, right? It's the government doing things directly to them. But all of a sudden, when it comes to international politics and America as an actor out in the world, it's like they flip and they lose their bearings on their proximity to power.
Yeah, okay. So this is a great, important subject conversation. Unfortunately, the IDW, the intellectual dark web, which I think is a fine. I like that term because it actually, we are pretty clear about who that means. Like, there's not much disagreement about like who's in that group.
Well, I mean, yeah, I would say like IDW, the new atheists, and then more generally like the anti-woke crowd.
Well, the anti-woke is a big, broad category that I'm a part of, right?
I would consider myself among that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, and that's and that's why I kind of got brought into a lot of this politics, because I was identified about 10 years ago as being one of the first, maybe the first anti-woke professor in a college campus. And so that's how I got on Joe Rogan. And then from there, like all the anti-woke crowd like adopted me kind of. And then I was like, wait, hold on, guys. What's up with you? And now what I found out over the subsequent 10 years or so is that from my values and just my values and from my perspective, based on what I want in life and who I want to hang out with, those people fucking suck. And I mean, like, yes, I agreed with them on the politics of the academic left. Yeah, the academic left is largely Maoist. Some Stalinists are around too, but they're horrendous. I mean, they are that bad. Because I lived among them for 25 years. I was a college professor for that long. And yeah, they're horrible. And I was one of the first people who was like raising alarms about them in the 1990s. When I was at Columbia, I was like, these people, watch out, this is no good.
And where do you think that comes from? Just to do like a little side track, like what do you think it is about academia that makes them particularly susceptible to these types of ideas?
So the left from Rousseau and the Jacobin Revolution onward has been authoritarian. I mean, if you start, I can make an argument here. I don't think I need to for this audience, but it's always been authoritarian. The socialist left, which to me that's the left, the socialist left. So that's number one, because it requires, social engineering on that scale requires authoritarianism. This is, again, libertarians know this. So there's that. Then there's also this very uncomfortable, what's it called? Inconvenient truth about the left in this country, for sure, and in the West generally, but definitely in this country, the American left, which I know like the back of my hand. It's been who? A bunch of intellectuals, not workers, not the salt of the earth, not coal miners. No, it's been a bunch of fucking college professors. And that's it.
Like a cushy gig and comfortable, not a lot of like actual real world hard work. And when you're in that sort of palace, it's easy to lose track of what is good and what is bad and how things actually are enacted out there.
So check it out. So if you look at the 20th century college professors at the elite schools like Columbia, where I was, so there've always been two wings, right? There's been the liberals who kind of run the place and then there's like always been like 20% who are like left socialist types, right? So yeah, the left socialist types come up with sort of like authoritarian identity politics stuff, right? Which sucks, and it's in the culture, and it's authoritarian, and it affects sort of like hiring, lots of bad stuff, and like my son couldn't get into the college he wanted to get because of it, blah blah blah. The liberal intellectuals at these schools in the 20th century were doing what? They were deciding and then planning every single war the United States entered into. Every single one, from the Spanish-American War to Iraq to Ukraine, was the idea of a handful of college professors at Columbia or Harvard or Berkeley, and that's that.
And so I mean, I don't know. I guess like I didn't think about it that way. I always like felt like that was like the CIA and the State Department, and then maybe they have influence or
professors created all those things. If you look at the history of the CIA, the State Department, the foreign policy establishment, the think tanks is where they get the people from, the personnel, right? Mm-hmm. And the think tanks are all academics. If you look at every major research university in this country, every single one of them, they all have a foreign affairs and foreign policy department.
Yeah.
Every one of them. And what do those people do for jobs after they graduate? They go to the State Department. They join the diplomatic corps. I mean, that's what they say. Those schools advertise this. If you want a job as a diplomat working for Tony Blinken, I have had students who have done this. It breaks my heart. We'll train you for that.
Right. But I mean, there has to be at least some influence. I know like the OSS, a lot of those guys were like business guys, lawyers and Wall Street. And I have to imagine it has to be like some sort of confluence of we have business interests.
That's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, Stephanie. I thought you were above that. And I thought you were Jewish.
These days I'm a self-hating Jew, so
we need more of that. No, not a self-hating Jew, actually. I don't want more of that. I just want more self-hating Zionism. Anyway, no, it comes from ideas. I'm a Hegelian when it comes to historical.
Okay.
Why history happens, as opposed to a Marxist. Marxist would say it's material conditions, would be something like economic, like the banks doing stuff.
Okay.
No, it's ideas. Ideas create history. The ideas starts it, and then they go get the bankers to fund it.
Okay.
I mean, I can show you. I'm writing about this right now, but I mean, it's just, you can look at every one of them. It came from the intellectual class. Like, well, think about it. And this is true in Rome too, right? How else? I mean, who else would think, oh, let's go from California to the Philippines and overthrow the government there and make it into an American colony for 50 years and fight all the savages. Like, first of all, you got to know the Philippines exists. You got to know why you would want to go over there. You got to be an intellectual. 90% of Americans don't know those things. So it's an intellectual project by necessity. This is not like some border war, like Gaza, Israel. You don't need to be an intellectual to sort of like get that you need to fucking fight. But on either side, in a way, right? But an imperialist war, building an overseas empire where the target is thousands of miles over an ocean, you got to have some thinkers, And so they all of them, and the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, they all came out of where? Harvard and the elite prep schools of the Northeast, which were just the intellectual training grounds for the American elite. It all comes out of the universities, every war in American history.
Okay.
Yeah. I promise.
I had taken you off a little sidetrack there. I know you were talking about, I can't remember exactly where we had gone off. I wanted you to explain why professors seem to be so inclined toward Maoism, Marxism type of stuff.
Right. So that's the 10 to 20% of professors who are leftist. As I said, most professors are just liberals, Democrats, and they're the ones with the power. But there's always been a significant minority since the 60s, even earlier, but always been a significant minority of like serious radical socialist leftists among, yes. Those people.
Yes, I remember we were talking about like the IDW, more broadly speaking, the anti-woke crowd, and why they seem to lose track of their proximity to power when it comes to international issues.
So let me
Why
do
can't
that. Let me
you
let me do let
see
me let
that
me
America is an empire?
so let me do that. There's a further split. There's another
Okay.
split
Yeah.
in the left, the academic left, which is where you're getting at. So I'll explain. I will hereby explain the reasons for the authoritarian politics of both
Okay.
wings of the academic left. Okay, so from the Bolshevik Revolution until the 1960s, the academic left was entirely Marxist, socialist, some kind of pro-Bolshevik, Stalinist, that. I think we know what that is. Not interested in identity politics per se. They were big into civil rights, but that's because the Soviet Union instructed them to care about truly. Some of them did genuinely, but it was also like an edict from the Kremlin, literally, to all the CP members in the United States. You must care and go march in the streets with Martin Luther King. But generally, what they weren't into, but the idea was you give the Negroes the civil rights and economic freedom, then they will become just like us, and you don't have to think about race anymore. So they weren't not interested. They were not interested in identity politics. Were not, and in fact, they saw King and the civil rights movement as an instrument, of course, to expand socialism in the United States. It was true story. Yes. Yeah, that whole 20th century left, the Marxist left, they weren't into identity politics. Then what happens in the 60s is the new left starts in reaction to the Vietnam War, which is a war against who? Third world peasants, brown-skinned people, and they're right next door to Mao's China. And Mao's got a huge movement that is international that celebrates the peasant and the brown masses of the world. And then all this, and then the Black Panthers are here, and they're a big thing, and they're joining up with Maoist China ideologically. The Black Panthers were talking about that's, and it's because of our blackness, not just our class, but our blackness, that we have been subjugated and oppressed, and we therefore are the revolutionary vanguard. So it became very quickly in the 70s in the New Left, Black and brown people around the world, led often by Black Americans, are the vanguard of the revolution. They are the ones who will lead us to socialism, utopia, whatever. And that's when identity politics starts. That's the origin of wokeness. People miss this. It's Maoism. And the old left, the Marxist left, the communist Stalinist left, hated it, actually. And so I came along in the 90s. I was at grad school in Columbia in the 90s, 91 to 2000. And I was teaching there too during that time. And so I was in the middle of it. I saw it. I helped organize a conference that kind of had this fight. It was a huge thing at Columbia in 1997. And there was a massive fight between the old Marxist left and the new identity politics left. Hated each other. And what happened was the identity politics left won. And the old Marxist left faded. They're still hanging on by the edges, but they're barely there. And then it just became like in the 2000s, it just became this avalanche of books and articles about Black people did this, Black people did that, Black people did this, Black people did that, and then it was like the Mexicans did this, and the brown people did this, and then they went on to the gays and the trans, and it became all about identity and not about class. Class got completely left behind, which is one reason, like, I think the current identity politics woke left is totally useless, because I do think a class analysis is the best thing that Marxists actually gave us.
Right. I always say like that if you actually look at some of the, and it can be Marx or just socialists in general, if you look at some of their initial analysis on like what's the problem in society, they have some really good things to say. It's just everything they say after that is not, it doesn't make sense, or it's completely totalitarian.
Yeah. So speaking of culture that are important, I think, sorry, there's a culture of class too. So class is an economic category, obviously. You either have to work for a living, or you own what they would call the means of production or something. You can live off your capital. That matters, right? But there's also a culture of class, which is totally independent of economic material reality. So if you ask Americans, what class do they belong to? Something like 90% say middle class. Even if they work as a cashier at CVS, they'll say I'm middle class. I'm like, and that means a lot. That means a lot, because there's a lot associated with being a middle class person in America, right? If you say, oh, so and so is a middle class guy in Connecticut, you already kind of have a picture of him in a sense, right? You see him in a house, you see him in a polo shirt, you see him driving a a Subaru, whatever. Like it's not, and you also most importantly, you see him as a good citizen. Middle class doesn't mean just like I have a middling salary. It means I'm a stable member of the society. That's the
Right, and
control. That's the
not and
control.
not part of like the rich elites who think they're too good for everybody.
Right, and working class always has an edge to it. That connotes a lot of stuff, and often it means kind of black or Italian, working, ethnic. Used to be Jewish back in the 20s and 30s when Jews were fun. It was like that's when working class always has an edge. That's a little anarchic. When you think working class, you're like, ooh, could be fun, but it could also be like a soccer hooligan riot. But middle class, there's no riots among the middle class.
Right.
That's who the parents are. That's who the storekeepers are. That's who the school principals are, and the teachers and the cops. Those are the people who are like, the state depends on a middle class. Defined as a cultural construct, not an economic one. You want the cashier at CVS who makes minimum wage to identify as middle class because she's not going to break laws.
Right. Because the system, if you identify as middle class, the system is working good enough for me, right? It's not there's some problems for sure, but I don't want instability because then what I do have goes away.
The middle class historically in the modern era has also, as I'm sort of saying here, has always been the great upholders of the statist culture. That's again, who are the teachers? Right? Who are the prison guards? Who are the cops?
Who are the accountants?
But more importantly, who are the people who talk on their behalf? Right. It's not poor people in the ghetto, and it's not like the leisurely elite, on their jet planes who give a fuck. It's the middle class who are the ones who are working and hustling and keeping this thing together and have homes, right? When you have a home, then you become very, very conservative and controlling because you have to. It's not because you're evil, because you have to. So now this analysis of the middle class serving as the disciplinary apparatus for the ruling elite, for the state, Stephanie, comes from Marx. That's his analysis. He calls it the petty bourgeoisie. And that's what they do. They serve as kind of like the foot soldiers for the statist establishment.
Well, I'm glad somebody else agrees with me, because sometimes I'll try to like make a comment about, I actually think that this part of what Marx says is accurate, or I'll say this isn't a like a left versus right issue. This is a we the people versus the state issue. And then people accuse me, oh, you're just a Marxist. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that's actually a foundational principle also of the United States, right? Isn't that how we founded? We said this power, this government is suppressing us, and we the people are standing up against it. And then, of course, even in our Constitution, we enshrine that principle. We said that if this government isn't working for us, we the people have the right to either secede, which I guess we kind of got that right taken away from us by Lincoln. But we have the right to form our own government, to rise up and reform our own government. Like, that's not Marxist. That's actually like the basis of a constitutional republic.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're talking about the right to revolution, right?
Right. And yeah. I mean, I'm not a proponent. I did a podcast last night saying, like, I'm a proponent of revolution, but not a violent revolution. I think it should be peaceful. And of course, if you have to defend your own actual physical property, but I don't endorse people taking up arms and going down to Washington, D.C. or going to Texas and protecting the border. I think that is a tactical mistake.
I just don't want to live in a revolution. Thank you very
much.
Yeah,
and then there's that.
I don't want my 22-year-old son to be, part of a revolution. I don't want him to be anywhere near a revolution because one side's gonna snatch him up and conscript him.
Right.
My house is likely to get burned down. I might get conscripted because, like, in Ukraine, they're conscripting guys my age. So why not a revolution? And historically, everybody, come on, show me one that was fun. Show me one that was a good time. I mean, show me one, sorry, that wasn't a catastrophe for ordinary people, for masses of ordinary people. You can't show me one. I mean, the glorious, virtuous Haitian Revolution, overthrowing the French slaveholding colonial overlords. What a virtuous idea, but we now know that it involved the slaughter of thousands, including many children. And then Haiti became what it became too. So it wasn't like things were suddenly glorious after the revolution. No, it's always a bloody business. That's another story. Can we, I want to get to Gaza and the proximity of power.
I was going to say, okay, we've had a good conversation about some of the philosophical underpinnings of power, proximity, the various modern sort of political groups and their positioning to that. So let's bring it to Palestine, or more specifically, Israel-Gaza.
Yeah. So, and this I think will serve as a good example of what I've been talking about in terms of the culture of the state and how it deeply affects people's views of politics, views of the world, but especially politics. It shapes you. It sort of builds in your presumptions about the presumptions you come to the news with. When you read that there was an uprising or whatever, you read there was, however you want to phrase it, an attack on October 7th. If you had, I had been studying and teaching about Israel-Palestine for 20 years. Not an expert on it. I've only written one article about it. But I know it pretty well, and because of that, and everybody who studies it has feelings about it, no matter what side you're on, I think, right? I mean, it's pretty much the most evocative political issue that I've encountered, which is saying a lot.
Right. I mean, it's been injected into our culture for decades. So
but I mean, just to me, the
issues that can compare to it in that way.
But just to me, the drama, the story, and for both, I mean, the fact that the bad guys for us on our side, and as Jews, are Holocaust survivors, right? Who built a state, which don't love, but still is like a hell of a project. When they were getting off the boats from the camps, I mean, gets to you. And then the Palestinian story. I mean, even Zionists cry, they say, about the Palestinians. I mean, who was it? Golda Meir? Was it her? One of the prime ministers of Israel said, what was it? We shoot and then we cry. We kill and then we cry.
I'm not sure who said it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I've heard many pro-Israel people say that they've cried about the Palestinians. And it's like, how can you not? I mean, that story is just, it's biblical. It is amazing how the Old Testament and the Holocaust have been played out for the Palestinians since 1948. It's just, I mean, literally the images from Gaza look like what I imagined the Old Testament marches through the desert to look like, or, rounding people up for cattle cars in the 1940s looked like. I mean, it's quite remarkable. But anyway, so because of that, I had a whole bunch of presumptions and feelings about it when I heard the news that there was a big attack killing lots of people in Israel. People from Gaza broke out and killed people in Israel. Which led me to pretty much immediately fear the next day. Like that was, I didn't have a lot of time actually to dwell on the killings of the 7th, even though since then I have many times had feelings about them. But I just knew, knowing what Israel had done to much smaller provocations to Gaza in the past, 6 times, I think it was. The most recent one, I think, or the biggest one, was 2,300 dead. And this was going to be 10, 20, 100 times. We still don't know. Is it going to be 1,000 times bigger? But I knew that. I knew that it was going to be just... So, that's where I was, because I didn't think of the Palestinians as terrorists. I don't even think of all of Hamas as terrorists. And this is something I've never heard anyone really talk about. But I would bet, again, just about anything, that there are some straight up sadistic terrorists, murderers in Hamas, in the Qassam brigades for sure, and in the Quds brigades too, sure. And that there's a lot of them whose baby daughters had their arms blown off by an Israeli bomb, and
Yeah,
that's
I
why they
think
want to.
about how activated I got during COVID and the lockdowns and the school closures, and I had never done like activism before, gone to protests, I did sit-ins, I did all these things. So I can only imagine if I was put into an even more extreme situation and having my rights suppressed even more, the possibilities that I might entertain for how to react to that. Of course, this is not an excuse for terrorism and for doing those things, but I think that you're being dishonest if you don't at least consider that possibility.
But right, and so the proximity to power, the closer you are to power, the less you know about the Palestinians as human beings, the less you know about them as a nuanced group of people, the less you know about all the stories about mothers in Palestine caring a whole lot about their kids getting killed, like a lot. Just guess what? Just as much as mothers in America do. And not celebrating and not throwing their kids into the battlefield, to celebrate them as shaheeds. But it's just so there's that. So the people who have the closer you are to proximity to power, the more likely you are just to simply identify with the Israelis, because the Palestinians are savages, essentially. I mean, that's all the discourse about them since then on the pro-Israel side. That's really all they have to say. They will say, we feel bad about the children being killed, but that's Hamas's fault. And then everything else about the people of Gaza is just about the savages who live there. They may not always say all Gazans are savages, but they will never say what I said about them, which is that they're like human beings with some differences, but they're not all savages, and that's not even close to true. And it's not a culture of martyrs in the way that we're told it is. So, and then you find out that these savages raped and beheaded which both been shown to be lies, even though they're still repeating these lies. But then, I mean, of course, it really doesn't feel bad, I would guess, to kill 15,000 kids, to make arguments on Twitter and on your podcast that help support something that kills 15,000 children. Because if, I mean, yeah, they're kids. I'm imagining this is what's in the mind. Well, yeah, they're kids, and that does make me wince, but we know what they're going to become as soon as they grow up, because that's the other stream of discourse from the pro-Israel side, right? Is that, Hamas educates the children to hate Jews. So they have no chance to not hate Jews. They're just going to become terrorists. And Stephanie, I cannot fucking explain. I cannot explain how people can make long-winded arguments in support of this, in support of something that is going to kill 100 kids today. It's something between 50 and 100 kids die per day in Gaza, and it's probably going to go up because of Rafah. But that's the number. It's right around there. It's like maybe 75 or 80 children, and then another like 30 or 40 women. And call yourself a libertarian. Can we review that? Can we review?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a split within, even just narrowing down from the anti-woke crowd specifically into the libertarian crowd. There certainly seems to be, there's a crowd that's pretty good, the Dave Smiths and the Scott Portmans. Then there's this other side that seems to forget that, and I tweeted this out yesterday. I was like, I don't even like my own government. Why would I like and support a government halfway around the world? So I don't really understand how any libertarian would then be pro-Israel, right? Not that you have to be pro-Palestine necessarily, but pro-Israel? Like, what's going on there?
Right. Yeah, it's not just a state too, as a libertarian, you don't have to be necessarily opposed to the existence of a state or call for the abolition of some state. Okay, I get you don't. There's no necessity in that. But you're at least, you have to be skeptical of the state's claims, don't you? I mean, aren't you as a libertarian, isn't the first thing you are is skeptical of what a government says? And is it only, you're only skeptical of the US government? But you're not in this case because you're not skeptical of the State Department, which is arguably the most important wing of the entire United States of America, is the State Department. That's where the most power in the world resides, is in that building. They're the ones who decide basically who lives and dies around the world. Who gets to live in which country around the world. They've made those decisions for 100 years now. Where the borders are drawn, it's all literally, they drew it in the 40s, and during World War II, the State Department, they drew up maps and said, okay, this is where Poland is going to be. This is Czechoslovakia. It's a new country. We're going to make that, and whatever. And and this population is going to go here, and this population is going to go over there, and they'll have the new rights in these new countries that we invented. I mean, that's the State Department. They decide on which wars to enter into.
And so what do you think it is that just like causes their brain to shut off? Like, is that just how effective propaganda is? Are they not real libertarians and they're just grifting? Like,
well, wait, let me finish though. Like, I'm
okay,
about
ahead,
to call yourself a libertarian and support Israel in any way, shape, or form, and I mean that. Like, and it's not about being an anti-Zionist. It's just about being a non-Zionist. I mean, that's the libertarian position, right? Zionism is about the creation of what? The state of Israel, guys. It's not like feel goods about Jews. It's about a state, a nation state, the creation of one. Okay, so that right there should be all you need to know to want the United States to have nothing to do with that thing. Nor should you promote it, support it in any way, shape, or form. Why is it different? Why is it different? Well, here's one way it is different than basically every other state in the world. And it's the other reason that libertarians should completely have no business with it, is that it is an ethno-state. It is the most absurd shit in the universe, based on what, and especially in this case, why am I eligible for citizenship in that country?
Right.
What? My family hasn't been in a synagogue in 200 years. Like, and I'm only a quarter Jewish. And what? And I'm an anti-Zionist. And my mother is an anti-Zionist. And my and no one gives a shit about Israel. No one's been to Israel. No one's been in my family to the Middle East ever. And it's because so then what is the rationale for that then? And what do they say? What do they say ultimately at the end of the day? The Bible says this is our homeland. Every foundational Zionist claim, and the settlers understand this, they cut right to it. That's what I love about the settlers, right? Every time the settlers talk, the only argument they make, because they don't give a fuck, is the only Zionist argument. The Bible says, look right here, it says Jerusalem, blah, 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 we shall be in whatever.
Yes, we're the indigenous. What I think is funny is that they're basically making the same argument as the Native Americans were making, right? As like the woke crowd made for the Native Americans. Oh, we stole this indigenous land and we should give it back to them. And we rejected that. We say that this is like grievance politics. It's not, it's
no, way worse. No, it's way worse.
I know it's way worse because they left the land and now they're claiming to come back, whereas we actually ethnically cleansed the Native Americans. But
it's even worse than that because the Native Americans, the Indians, were like, here's our evidence for you like slaughtering the people and indigenous people because we're standing on your fucking They didn't need to show you a book. They didn't need to like say, hey, go look at the Bible. No, it was like, hello, you can see dead bodies across the continent. No, the Zionists, they just opened a damn Torah and say, look, see, that's why we should have a nation state and oppress the Palestinians. So it is a nation state that is exclusive to one ethnicity, that is defined by biblical references. And because I thought libertarians were like of the Enlightenment, you know, and kind of into like rationality and scientific method and, you know, all that good stuff. And, you know, rejecting, you know, old superstitious religions. And, you know, I thought they were like very much an Enlightenment, classical liberal, you know, not into the, you know, dictates of the church, you know, we don't. No. Like, I mean, for a libertarian to have anything to do with this thing is staggering to me. And I have found out one reason that there are some libertarian journalists who are super pro-Israel, which is that they've all gone on multiple trips to Israel sponsored by Israel. Israel has been, I've been doing more research into, though I need to do more. Israel, you may know about this. Israel for years and years and years has done these like regular annual trips for American journalists. They bring them over in groups and propagandize them for a week and put them up in hotels, and you know they get
I don't know, similar to Taglit or Birthright.
Right. Yeah. It's like Birthright for journalists.
Right.
So
but still, you would think that libertarians would have enough sense to at least go on that trip and view it through a critical lens and not just be like, oh, I stayed at a nice hotel and partied. Israelis know how to party. They're good at it. It's a fun place. It is a modern place. But still, you would think that they would have the sense to view the geopolitical stuff and basically the propaganda tour through a critical lens. I just don't understand how a little bit of free stuff makes you lose all your values and principles.
Well, the libertarians who are pro-Israel are also pro-Ukraine and pro-NATO. So I'm thinking of mostly the Reason magazine, Reason.com, those are the people I'm closest to, unfortunately, among libertarians. And they were the first ones to kind of discover me, and like they reviewed my book first. And I've done a lot of stuff for Reason. I've written for them like 20 times. I've done a lot of things. And I like them a lot, and they're friends of mine. Many of them are friends of mine. It took me a while to notice this because they're very quiet about foreign policy. But whenever they do make a peep about it, it's basically like a very kind of soft sideways support for the empire, for NATO, for Ukraine, for Israel. So like they ran pieces about the Israel-Gaza war. What were the pieces? They were like interviews with hostage family people and how terrible it was that the hostages were taken, and how what an ordeal these people are going through, which is completely true and accurate. And yes, tell the story. It's just that, yes, the media is already telling that story. We've been told this constantly, and no one denies that. And what about also, and that would be fine too if you did like a commensurate piece with a Palestinian family. You don't even have to go to Gaza. You can go to West Bank. There's how many have been killed in the West Bank in the last year, you know? Or the better yet, how about families of one of the 5,000 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners who were in military jails on no charges, and some of them are children, many of them, hundreds are children. How about, you know, do an interview, like a feel bad interview with one of the Palestinian families right next door? No. And then lots of similar stories about the plight of the Ukrainian people fighting the onslaught, the unjustified onslaught of the Russian military. No analysis at all of NATO's role in this. None of that. It's I don't think, especially now with Gaza, with Reason's coverage of Gaza and Ukraine, I don't think I can work for them anymore. I mean, I don't think I can write for them or do anything for them. I can't stand it. I can't be and it's not even, I mean, I guess it's moral in some sense, but it's really just like, I would like to think if I am ever besieged with my family in an enclosed ghetto, being bombed by two superpowers essentially in collaboration, you know, and guys, the only people who are defending us are dudes in Adidas tracksuits and maybe an RPG. I would like for other people around the world to be on my side and to maybe, you know, call attention to my plight here. So I'm doing it for myself, you know, in the and it's always a chance. It could always happen. Look at world history. It could happen to anybody. You could get fucked over hard by a government at the drop of a hat. Any one of us can.
Yep.
Well, in that case, if some government surrounds me and my family and starts bombing us, I would hope that other people in the world would come to our rescue. And that's truly why I do this. And I think it's the politics of self-interest. It's self-interest. This, like, Ayn Rand should be into this. She should, that it's a very self-interested, selfish position I'm taking.
Right.
I'm doing this. Yeah.
I think that they are miscalculating where their self-interest is, right? I think that they see their self-interest in, like, okay, what we have in America here is great. And apparently there's other people out there who don't like what we have. And so even if it doesn't perfectly align with these principles and values I have and I can stand on when it comes to domestic issues, I have to take this other side because I want to be able to protect what I have here. I think it's a short-sighted and miscalculated self-interest versus what you're taking a much more broader perspective and longer term self-interest. And I think that time factor probably has a lot to do with it. I think even for myself, like, I do a lot of things that are not great for my own self-interest in the short term. Like, I was fired from my job for being a threat to public health and not getting my 2 shots like a good girl. And in the short term, there were a lot of people who were like, you're giving up a good salary and benefits and security because you don't want to just take a shot, And I'm like, well, I have longer term goals that I would like to achieve in life. And I don't think taking an experimental drug is going to help me achieve those. So,
yes.
Yeah.
But Stephanie, it was in the national interest for you to take that drug. And can you imagine someone making life and death decisions based on the national interest? So that tells me, and we know that's what people do. I mean, that's why they send their sons off to war, right? They don't always do that, but when they do, that's what they're doing. So that tells me, and this is a key concept for me that libertarians I'd love to think about, is like it's a merger of one's own identity with the nation state. I am America, America is me. What's good for America generally? I mean, they can have like differences about details, but like generally speaking, the better off America is, the better off I will be. So again, the presumption going into the news, when you read the news and find out what's going on, in other words, like, oh, is this going to be good for America? Is America the good guy? What? I submit, that the interest of your nation state that you happen to belong to is not always coincidental with your interest. They might be at odds even. Guess what? It's true. So just don't let yourself be hooked in by that set of ideas, which is, again, it's taught in the schools. It's taught in the New York Times. It's taught on Fox News. Wear the American flag. We have to talk about your glasses, by the way.
I know. Well, because I say that the flag doesn't represent the state. The flag represents we the people. And we the people are supposed to hold, the state is supposed to be a representative of us. I think that if it's going to be effective in any matter, it must be a very, very small state, and local, as local as possible. But, I like the flag. I like the idea of liberty and those fundamental values on which our country was founded. And so I rock the flag with those caveats. And yeah, so, go ahead.
This is what I did with this is what I did with the flag. So this is the cover of my book. So look what some of the stars became.
Yep.
Guitar. That's a prostitute's boot right there.
Oh, yep. Rock and roll, cigarettes.
And then that's poison. For BDSM. Oh, and then is a joint on the top there. No, not poison. That's alcohol. Alcohol used to be labeled XXX during Prohibition.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's, if you want to subvert it in that way, then I'm cool with the flag. So again, this is like another element of what I'm calling thick libertarianism or cultural libertarianism, which is really what I'm about. Now, if you want to call me a cultural libertarian, I will own that label any day of the week for sure. That's me. But but most libertarians I find are not cultural libertarians. Ron Paul, for instance, even though he and I would vote exactly the same in Congress, otherwise we are totally different people. Totally different people. He's very conservative. He wears the suit and tie, and and his whole thing is the classical liberal disciplined individual being necessary for the preservation of liberty. The state will try to control us if we don't control ourselves. It's a good argument, but what it means is you have to be puritanical all the time. And so that's why that wing of libertarianism celebrates hard work and, not drinking and being a good Puritan American. And so they miss a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, and they're not interested in cultural freedom. They don't seem to be terribly interested in rock and roll in that way, the anarchic side of culture. In fact, they're sort of afraid of it. But the main thing I don't care, it doesn't matter how you live in your personal life and whether you wear a suit and tie or not. It's your psychological relationship to the state. Is your identity, the relationship between your identity as an individual, as you, and the state, America, and all of its constructs? That's the question. And I'm just suggesting that anybody who cares about individual liberty, you want to keep those things separate. You want there to be a delta between the culture of the state and who you are. Your identity is you and yours alone. Don't make it American. You're not American. You don't have to be.
All right, so we'll talk about my glasses another time.
Okay.
I'm going to keep rocking them for now, but I think that is a great place to end. What is your relationship with the state in a psychological and cultural sense? And how does that position you in the political issues of the day, whether it be Israel, Gaza, whether it was, COVID, and whatever the next thing is going to be. Yeah. So if you're checking in, leave us a comment down below. Let us know what you think about this analysis of proximity of the state. Make sure you're following Thaddeus. I have your Twitter link down below. You are a historian. You have a book, which is Renegade History. And then I believe that, your podcast is Unregistered Podcast.
Yeah, and I have and Unregistered Academy is my school. You can go to our website. Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. So go check all that stuff out. And I appreciate you. And make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff for the algorithm. And until next time, live free, think free, and give all the glory to God.